Glad to see you all. I'm in New York. How are you? Okay, good. Happy to see you all. Hello, Mark, Miriam, Sabine, Lou, everybody. Caroline, Christine, Yuval have this to discuss this amazing, outrageous, over the top, unbelievable topic called bodhicitta. See if we can do justice to it. So, wait a minute, see, can you hear me there? I haven't heard any words from you people. Can you hear me?
We hear you quite well, Venerable.
Can you hear me, Lars? Just
yes,
say something.
I hear you well.
You nod your head, Lars. Can you hear me?
I can hear you.
Yes.
I can't hear you guys. What's going on?
Sorry. Yes, we can hear you.
What's happening?
Venerable Rubina.
I can't hear you people talking. What's going on with my thing?
Maybe on.
Talk to me, somebody, so I can see.
Hello.
I can't hear anybody.
I'm talking.
No, I can't hear. What's happened?
Maybe.
Can't
Good
hear a
evening.
word.
Hello.
I can't see what to change.
Look at the little speaker
Oh,
in the bottom right-hand corner. At least mine is on my computer. I put that off for
I
some
don't know what
reason.
else to change. Everything looks in the right position.
She can't hear me.
What's that saying? I've got some Greek words on my. Why have I got Greek words down on my window? There's Greek words.
I think it's Russian.
Look, maybe it's to do with Cyprus.
Sorry, that was my computer.
The car there, yeah. But I can't hear you all. This is the problem. Maybe I'll
Yeah.
have to start my computer again. I mean, my
Maybe.
volume buttons are all up.
Tara,
The
look by
fullest.
the name of Robina
So I
Courtin.
don't
There's
know what
like
the
a
problem
pin.
is.
Maybe
I'll
that
have to
is
start
something.
again. I don't know. I can't not hear. you.
Yeah, the pin is she's on spotlight.
Let me restart the thing and just see what happens. Sorry, it'll be a couple of minutes.
Yeah. Hard to explain if she can't hear us, so you never know. I had that happen once. I couldn't hear anybody. Somehow my speaker was turned off. That's why everybody saw the.
Sometimes you just have to
Russian.
reboot the computer and then the sound is back on.
Yeah.
Yuval, are you spinning the wheel? Are
Spinning.
we waiting? Yes, he is. Better to spend the time usefully. Om mani padme hum, om mani padme hum, om mani padme hum, om
Om
mani
tare
padme
tu tare. Om mani padme hum.
Not a second to waste. Om mani padme. Om mani padme hum. Om mani padme. Om mani padme hum.
So now talk to me again, Tara.
Hello, can you hear me?
Oh, I can hear you. Okay, great. Now we're on. We're all together. Here's-
Excellent.
How's it going, people? Let's start. Let's
We would-
start.
May we do the offer the mandala? It's the first.
That's what I mean by let's start. That's what I mean. So we're going to offer the mandala, which means thinking that we're offering, making an offering to the Buddha as a request for the teachings. So of course, this is ancient Tibetan Indian tradition, but the meaning is the point. So the meaning here, as it says, we are offering this ground anointed with perfume, strewn with flowers, and Lars can sing it, adorned with Mount Meru, the 4 continents, the sun and the moon. We mightn't think of our universe like that, but this is Buddhist cosmology from centuries ago, but never mind. So then you can just imagine all the marvelous things of the world, pile them all up in your mind as big as you can. I imagine this is a Buddha land and offer it. So then may all transmigratory beings enjoy this pure land. So we're making an offering to the Buddha as a request for these teachings on bodhicitta. So special. Okay, Lars.
Sa shi perki Chuk sing meto, Samri rablingi, Nihirek yan pari, Sange jindu mekche ulagi, Rukunanda shingla, Jepacho, Jetsun lama dam pakena, Kecher kikala, Ken se tri, Jita sampe de gazin mala, Sagye Churki Chapa, Raptu So, Idam Guru Ratma Mandala Kamya Chayami.
All right. So now, as always, we set off with our little motivation, our goal, stating our purpose, which is what motivation means. It mightn't mean that initially to us, but that's the point. What's your goal? Where are you going with this? Why are we all here together? So the first two lines we're saying, I'll say it first in English, until we are enlightened, we're going to rely upon the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Sangha. And then by the virtuous karmic seeds that we plant in our mind from listening to these teachings, may we become a Buddha, no matter how long it takes, so we can be a benefit to suffering sentient beings. Sangye, Chorang Soke Chognam La, Janchu Badu, Dagni, Kyapsu Chi, Dagi, Chunyen, Gipe, Sonam Ki, Drola Penche, Sangye, Dropa Shok, Sangye, Chorang Soke Chognam La, Janchu Badu, Dagni, Kyapsu Chi, Dagi, Chunyen, Gipe, Sonam Ki, Drola Penche, Sangye, Dropa Shok. All right, everybody, wonderful. Okay. So far in these series of modules, we're up to number 10. We've discussed, if we take the Lam Rim as our basis, this Tibetan packaging of the teachings coming from our lineage Lama Tsongkhapa in the 14th century, which is a packaging of the teachings based upon Atisha, this 11th century Indian yogi who spent the last 17 years of his life in Tibet. It's based upon a text of his that is basically taking all the main points from this vast body of knowledge. I'll show you the Buddha behind me. But from this vast body of knowledge that's studied in this great Nalanda tradition for, since 5th, 6th, 7th, 8th, 9th century in Tibet, in India, that passed fully developed into Tibet in the 7th century with Guru Rinpoche. So what Tsongkhapa does, taking Atisha's text as his basis, as we've been discussing many times, he took all the essential points of this body of knowledge and presented them in this nice, orderly way in 3 levels. So as I always quote, as Lama Zopa would politely, he's honoring the lineage, as he would put it, the first level of the teachings are the teachings and practices suitable to the disciple of the least capability, and that would be the teachings that we know of as the Hinayana teachings that you would study and practice in Thailand and Burma, the goal of which, the first stage of which, that's the first scope, and which I would refer to as junior school, speaking colloquially. Then you've got the next level of practice, which is the teachings and practices suitable to the disciple of the middle capability, which you would also study and practice in Thailand and Burma, for example, the Theravadan teachings. But there you would graduate there and you would achieve your own liberation, your own nirvana, your cessation of suffering and its causes. So all that's the nuts and bolts of the teachings we've discussed so far in the last 9 modules. The mind, its function, how it works, the details about it. The last module, particularly the teachings in the middle scope. The earlier one is also another term for these teachings and practices suitable to the disciple of the middle capability, the middle scope. And then the first level, which is high school, and the first level, the lowest capability, whatever. These are the teachings and practices about karma, living in vows, purification, and all of that, the ground of our practice. So all of that is enough to qualify us to finally then eventually realize emptiness, get shamatha, realize emptiness, and get the hell out of this mess and not come back. But here we now have the third scope, or the great scope, or university level, as I like to call it. Or if we take the analogy of the 2 wings, the first 2 are the wisdom wing, and now we've got the compassion wing. So the first and second scopes, the wisdom wing, are all the nuts and bolts of all of Buddha's teachings that we need personally to apply to ourselves. In this framework, there's no context, there's no discussion of compassion. That necessarily is in the great scope, university level, that comes after understanding karma, dealing with our own suffering, getting rid of delusions, blah, blah, blah. That's the intense internal personal practice of one's own compassion. So now that qualifies us to now really start to properly practice this amazing levels of compassion that Buddhism would describe, you know. And the fact is, without the wisdom wing, without the first and second scopes, without junior school and high school, we are simply not qualified to practice the bodhisattva path. It's a fact. Because the level of compassion that Buddha talks about is way more insane, way more outrageous, way more radical than we would ever think in the usual view of the current model of the world in the understanding of compassion. It's way more outrageous. It's shocking, in fact. And you will not understand it even intellectually, not to mention experientially develop it until you've got at least intellectual understanding, and not to mention experiential, of the first and second scopes of karma and the mind. This is so important to understand, you know. Okay, so bodhicitta. It's a Sanskrit term, and I mean, somehow most of the terms we can translate. But for some reason, I think this one, you hear it means enlightened attitude, you hear it means enlightened thought. And somehow, I don't know, just bodhicitta, like anything, you can start to get the meaning of it. It gets its own flavor, you know. So I always like to use the word bodhicitta, right? So some people can use the translation if you like. So what is it literally? Well, it's the mind, it's that attitude in the mind. But interestingly, we often use it kind of synonymously with the word compassion, and it's not that. It's the conclusion, it's the culmination of compassion. So in these course notes that we're going to be using, and they're quite extensive, the first part of which is put together by one of my nun friends, an Australian nun, K Minor, Venerable K Minor, in module 10, as you know. Let me just find it. I've got to find it now. There are different methods, different techniques, different packages of techniques for cultivating this bodhicitta. And it's in terms of the realizations of the essence of each of the three scopes. The first scope, the essence of it really is karma, understanding karma and abiding by the laws of karma and purifying every day and living in vows. The realizations of the second scope, which would be this renunciation of suffering and its causes, which is obviously based upon understanding what suffering is and what are its causes, which is the Four Noble Truths, all of which we've done. So now the conclusion, the realization from this third scope, the compassion wing, this great scope, the teachings and practices suitable to the disciple of the greatest capability, is the first of all is the accomplishment of this bodhicitta, and then the accomplishment of what are called the final stages of the bodhisattva's path, which are called the 6 perfections of the bodhisattva path. So I'm not sure, I've got a feeling that comes in another module. I can't remember. What's the name of the 11th module, Tara? You got it there?
I have to look it up. Give me 1 minute.
The
Give me
11th
one
module.
minute.
Tara, you hearing me?
Yes, give me 1 minute to find it.
Can't hear you, darling.
Ah,
What's
sorry.
happening to the volume again? I can't hear you again. It's gone away. Oh, no, wait.
Transforming problems.
Can you hear me, Venerable?
What's the 11th module?
Transforming
Transforming
problems.
Okay, that's okay. So here's the cultivation of bodhicitta, and I think must have been Rinpoche wanted to highlight the really radical approach to getting bodhicitta, which is what they call transforming problems. So that's a special. It's got its own module, but it's all part of the process of cultivating bodhicitta. And then what's the 12th one, Tara?
Sure, 1 second, please. Wisdom of emptiness is 12.
Okay, so the next one then, that's also that's the 6 perfections. What about the first 4 perfections? Where are they covered? What's the 12th module, 13th module?
13 is Introduction to Tantra.
Okay, so the 12th is what?
12 is Wisdom of Emptiness.
How come where are the other 4 perfections? They must be in this one. That's very strange. Okay, whatever. So anyway, yeah, okay. So now this bodhicitta. So there are 2 main, if we look in the contents of Venerable K's teachings, as opposed to the other modules, she's given names to each of her chapters, which I find most useful. So there are methods for developing bodhicitta, and there are usually two systems. One is called, it's in chapter 9, a summary of the sevenfold cause and effect system. And the other one is called is really the one of exchanging self for others, which is a more radical approach. But there's a third approach, which is a combination of both. Now, I don't know whether they've covered that in here. It must be, I suppose, but it's a combination of both, and it's divided up into 11 points. So I think we'll do that. That's in the Lamb Room, and we'll cover it like that. But of course, it's all here. All the discussion is in these course notes. And of course, I absolutely recommend that you study these teachings in the course notes, because I'm going to be presenting in a sort of different way, and I mightn't cover all the points. But I really like this combination of the two systems, and it comes into being 11. And Pabonka Rinpoche in Liberation, in the palm of your hand, presents these 11. So, I mean, it might come along, it might come in here, but otherwise I might just send you a little summary of that. Okay, so now, so what is bodhicitta? What is it? What's this attitude? It's the, like I said, it's not equivalent to compassion. It's the culmination, it's the result of having accomplished compassion. But not only compassion, this is the thing here on this path, there's a level of compassion that's actually referred to, and it's a technical term, it's called great compassion. And it's Mahakaruna in Sanskrit. It's a precise term for a level of compassion, which is really clear and really precise. So in general, so the whole of the compassion wing, the whole of the Bodhisattva teachings, the essence of it, you could argue in terms of the positive states of mind, it's the cultivation of love for sentient beings and the cultivation of compassion for sentient beings. These could summarize all the virtuous states, you know. So I find it interesting because often you hear in spiritual teachings, the essence of all of it is love, and Buddha would totally agree, but always the emphasis here is on not so much on the love, but on the compassion. Because it's love is, so, okay, what are the definitions of these states of mind? The definition of love, I mean, all these states of mind, and we've talked often enough about the mind, the different delusions, we discussed that last module and earlier again, right back at the beginning module. You know, you've got positive states of mind, you have negative states of mind, and you have these neutral states of mind, these three categories of states of mind when you study the Buddhist model of the mind. So remember, the delusions or the afflictions are these neurotic, I-based, fear-based, distorted, delusional, miserable states of mind that amazingly Buddha has found are not at the core of our being and can be removed. This is the fundamental point to understand. And when we understand that, that gives us a better reference for understanding the development of the positive ones. So first of all, you could argue, before I give the definitions, that as you progress through the first stages of practice, junior school and high school, as you progress through the renunciation component, the wisdom wing, the main job is first you're controlling your body and speech. First, you're controlling the servants of your delusions. You're stopping harming others, which is abiding by the laws of karma. Then you get to the second scope and you start to be able to get into the mind now because you've subdued the servants of your delusions. Now you can really begin to investigate your mind and be your own therapist and unpack and unravel. And the crucial job being, all the way from there to Buddhahood, is distinguishing between the delusions and the virtues, the positive and the negative. This is a unique approach in Buddhist psychology. And if we don't understand this, we simply don't understand Buddhist psychology. It's really, I can't stress this enough. It's absolutely vital. And this particular model of the mind is unique to the Buddha, totally unique to the Buddha. Okay, so the emphasis in the lower scope and the middle scope is you're controlling yourself, you're disciplining yourself. Your main emphasis is refraining from harming, refraining from doing harm. Then you get to the next level, high school, and you're now learning to identify these delusions, to distinguish between those and the virtues. And the emphasis is not so much on developing the virtues, that comes now in the compassion wing. The emphasis is on subduing the delusions, not following the delusions. It's a very fierce, intentional level of practice. Very specific. You lessen your attachment, you lessen the anger, you lessen the jealousy, you lessen the low self-esteem, etc., etc. So it's sort of obvious, isn't it? If the mind is full of neurotic states of mind and positive states of mind, if you're emphasizing lessening the negative states of mind, it goes without saying, doesn't it, that as you lessen anger, lessen attachment, lessen jealousy, automatically it enhances love, it enhances compassion, it enhances forgiveness and patience. It goes without saying, but that's not the main emphasis in the wisdom wing. It's an inevitable result of subduing your body, speech, and mind that you start to become more loving, more patient, more connected to others. But it's only in the compassion wing, this level of practice, where you proactively, actively practice developing the positive states of mind. You're continuing from here to Buddhahood to lessen the neuroses, but here now you're beginning to develop the positive states. It's a very precise approach. It's logical and progressive, you know, because it's logical. If you're overwhelmed, if like you're in some relationship with your boyfriend and you're overwhelmed by low self-esteem and attachment and jealousy and anger, it's very hard to practice love and forgiveness. It's just too difficult. It's too advanced, quite frankly. You've got to subdue your own neuroses, get some self-respect before you prepare to want your wretched boyfriend who beats you up to be happy. That's an advanced level of mind, you know. You've got to see these levels of practice. It's not how we're used to thinking in modern psychology at all, you know. It's very fascinating. So, okay, the essence of all the virtues, you could say, are love and compassion. So the definition of all of these states of mind, the definition of love, it starts with the thought. Everything comes down to being a concept. And you define it as a thought that you see someone happy and you are delighted for their happiness. You want them to be happy. That's the actual definition of love. Wanting someone to be happy is the meaning of love. So of course now, the way we think of love, it's completely connected to attachment. You know, we conflate them. But this has got nothing, the virtues by definition have nothing to do with the delusions. So we have to learn to nourish that part of us and identify it. And that's what these teachings here, these 11 things, or this cause and effect, the 7 cause and effect, these different systems. This is what we're gradually attempting to do, to develop the positive qualities, you know. So compassion is when you see someone suffering, may you not suffer. So I remember asking one of my teachers, one Geshe Tektok, my philosophy teacher, which one would come first? He said, depends on the person, you know. It depends on the person. So one is wanting people to be happy and one is not wanting them to suffer. That's the meaning of love and compassion. So here, you could argue they are the summary of all the positive qualities, you know, it's clear. If you have love and compassion, you forgive. If you have love and compassion, you have patience. If you have love and compassion, you're generous. If you have love and compassion, you have, you know, you want to help others. It's sort of clear. It's very essential, love and compassion. May you be happy. And compassion, may you not suffer. So now there's this next level, which is unique to the Bodhisattva path, called great compassion, Mahakaruna. And you could argue you've also got great love. I don't think they use that term much, but this is the point about it. And this is the unique characteristic of the compassion of the Bodhisattva path. So compassion is, oh my God, look at that suffering. May they not suffer. Look at that suffering. This is unbearable. And remember, by the way, there are 3 levels of suffering that you learn about in the Four Noble Truths. The first is the suffering of suffering, which is where the bad things happen. And that usually is the only compassion we have. But then once you've done the Four Noble Truths for yourself, you then realize the second kind of suffering, which is actually what we all refer to as happiness, which is the predominance of attachment. And then the subtlest level of suffering is all pervasive suffering, which is the subtlest of all, which we don't even consider. So these you're already learning about in the Four Noble Truths for yourself, and now you can begin to apply this to others. So then this means this love and compassion we're discussing will be for all sentient beings automatically, not just the ones who are suffering, not just the victims. And that's what's so radical about these levels of love and compassion, you know. So this unique extra level of compassion, great compassion, basically it's you see suffering and you go, oh my God, look at that suffering, it is unbearable, may you not suffer. But the great compassion is the one that His Holiness often would refer to as the Bodhisattva approach. I have to sneeze, hang on, not one come, is what can I do to take away the suffering. That's great compassion. In other words, we can have such compassion. We could have compassion. We really will see the suffering in the world. But the brave attitude of the bodhisattva is the one of what can I do? It's this sense of personal responsibility, or as Holiness would sometimes used to refer to it as universal responsibility. So it's a very courageous attitude. You know, I mean, they often use the analogy, and it's a really good one, of a mother for her child, you know. Of course, it's based on attachment, but the mother will see her child drowning. She'll have incredible compassion. Oh my God, look at my child. But she does not wait and look around and wonder who's going to save her baby. She knows it's her job. That's great compassion. So we have to cultivate that, because that's massive. That's a brave attitude that we're trying to cultivate, this great compassion. And then eventually that culminates in this outrageous attitude of bodhicitta. So so bodhicitta has two parts. That once you've accomplished it, and it's not equivalent to compassion, it's the culmination of compassion. What it is this, once you've got bodhicitta, there's this spontaneous, there's this shift in your mind, a profound shift occurs in your mind because you've been practicing all this time, where you only will want to benefit others. It's like automatic now. Your job is to benefit others. Like that mother, as if every being in the universe were your precious child. You know it's your job. That's when you've got it, you know. We can have moments of it, but we're talking about, I'm just in the middle of teaching, Matt. Can I call you back? Thanks, Tom. So, sorry. So it's this fierce attitude. Once you've accomplished it, it wouldn't just be moments. You see, we think of these qualities as things you just have a flash of them, a moment of them. But what we don't understand, these techniques will eventually get us to cultivate these states of mind where they are literally stable. It's like you can play the music sometimes on the piano and it sounds very nice, but when you've perfected the playing of the piano, you can do it every time. That's these levels of compassion and love that the Buddhist, these techniques are enabling us to accomplish. Not just moments of flashes of kindness, but when there's solid and stable and genuine realizations, you know. So this bodhicitta is this paradigm shift in the mind, where they would say one of the criteria of having accomplished bodhicitta is literally there'd be no longer the thought of I. There's no longer the thought to get anything for the I. Now think about it, even if we're nice people, the thought of I is the central player in our head. It's inevitable. We're all like that. But there's no, for these bodhisattvas, and it seems too bizarre to think this is possible. In fact, we would think in our modern psychology that you're mentally ill if there's no longer a thought of I. I mean, you know you're I, you're not stupid. You know you're not confusing. You know, I don't go and pick up your hand and pick my own nose with your finger. I know it's my hand and your hand. I'm not stupid. But there's no longer that sense of a separate I, unhappy I, who wants things and needs things and always is the reference point for most of our thinking, which is, don't be embarrassed, it's how we are. Bodhisattvas no longer have that. And we're not even describing having accomplished emptiness yet. This bodhicitta is so outrageous. I mean, I sometimes when I told you, when I first heard about this bodhicitta, when I first heard the teachings from Lama Zopa, you know, it was like too much for me. It was too much for my mind. I couldn't handle it. It just seemed insane. It seemed impossible. How are you? It's sort of like you've got to become a saint. And basically, it's a good term. A bodhisattva is what the Christians will call a saint, you know, who only thinks of others, who would sacrifice their life for others. And of course, in the Christian world, I don't think we think that we can become a saint. It almost seems we'd be arrogant to think we can become a saint. But that's the Buddhist view. We can all become saints. We can all become bodhisattvas, you know, it's the whole path, it's the process, it's the whole thing. And this is the framework of all the teachings in Tibet, you know. So this bodhisattva, the first point would be, when you've got bodhicitta, would be that you only, whoever's in front of you, whatever sentient being it is, a pedophile, a murderer, an ant, a kind person, your mother, your beloved baby, a rat, it makes no difference to your mind. You have equal love and compassion for them. You only want to benefit that being in whatever way is necessary. And this is the thing, this level of attitude is not a sentimental view. It's powerful. It's driven by wisdom. It's got strength in it because it's completely driven by wisdom. As His Holiness says, compassion's not enough. You've got to have wisdom. And that's not the kind of way we think of compassion. Often we think of it as sentimental and weak that makes you suffer. The absolute opposite here. It's got incredible power and clarity and wisdom. So you not only have the wish to benefit, but you know how. And that keeps growing, you know. That's the first quality of a bodhisattva. The second one, which is the long-term one, there's this fierce enthusiasm, attitude of never giving up ever until you finally accomplish Buddhahood. Because you're on this, you're this work in progress. You've gone through the first stages of the Lam Rim, the second stage is junior school, high school, you've got renunciation, you understand suffering, all the levels of it. You've now accomplished bodhicitta, which we're going to go through the methods for it. And then you're now on the path of the 6 perfections. And you practice this for countless lives, perfecting the 6 perfections, perfecting these stages of cultivation of your mind, perfecting your bodhicitta. And then in your meditation, which is the last 2 perfections, you're perfecting your wisdom. And then finally, the culmination of these 6 perfections is you become a Buddha, and this could be life after life after life after life. What's happening? Low battery. What's got a low battery? I'm confused. My phone. Oh gosh, that's my Wi-Fi, so I better plug it in. Here we go. Okay, so the second one, like I said, the second one is to never give up. You've got this fierce enthusiasm, this insane, ridiculous enthusiasm that no matter what, and this is the characteristic of bodhisattvas, this enormous enthusiasm to never give up life after life after life until you have finally become a Buddha, because then you're qualified to be perfectly wise, to know perfectly how to benefit every single sentient being for as long as time exists. That's bodhicitta. So it's pretty insane. So I remember when I first heard the teachings, like I've said before, I have to remind myself not to scream, not to shout. 2 nights ago, I'm in a hotel, you see, in New York. I had to come to New York for a minute. And 2 nights ago, I was teaching and I completely forgot, because I shout, what, I shout all the time, right? And it was at 10 o'clock at night, and the security guys had to come and tell me to keep my voice down. The people were complaining. It's only lunchtime right now, so they're probably not in their rooms, but I have to remember not to shout. I'm so sorry. Okay. So when I first heard, I always quote this, when I first heard the teachings from Lama Zopa, it just seemed insane, How could I possibly accomplish that? How could I never think of me? How could I have this? I mean, it just seemed like it was exhausting to hear it, because we know just loving one person is hard work, isn't it? And to think of having love and compassion for everybody equally is like demented unless you understand there's a system. You have to understand there's a system, So it seems so high, so ridiculous. So I remember His Holiness, I always heard this, it helped me. I remember reading, he said, if you want to benefit others, practice compassion. If you want to benefit yourself, practice compassion. So this is something that's a huge point that I often say in our culture, we miss this, because as soon as we hear that, we think, oh, that's selfish. But it's a really powerful point. Even from the very beginning, where the teachings say in the karma is don't kill, don't steal, don't lie. So it's obvious if you don't steal and don't kill and don't lie, it's because people, it causes suffering. So we assume the motivation has to be compassion, but not yet. No, it's got to be compassion for yourself. Because if you kill and you steal and you lie, forget about the harm you do to others. Buddha's trying to get us to see that we harm ourselves. And this is the point that we often don't get. So it's not selfish to think that. So even in the compassion wing, one of these series of points in these 11 steps to accomplishing bodhicitta is to think of the disadvantage. I think there's a chapter here too. Kay goes into it. To look at the disadvantages of cherishing yourself and look at the advantages of cherishing others, meaning to oneself. There's nothing wrong with that. It's an intelligent view. Eventually, of course, it becomes selfless. Of course it does, but you can't be selfless before you're selfless. So you've got to see the advantages to yourself of abiding by the laws of karma. You've got to see the advantages to yourself of being compassionate and wise. And when I heard His Holiness say that, that gave me a kind of gave me an understanding of how I could connect to it. Wow, it's amazing. That made sense to me. It really was helpful, So, I mean, I can't rave on about compassion. I just can't do it. I don't know what to say. I have to read the books. It's not natural to me. It's like, but if I listen to Lama Zopa Rinpoche if you read Lama Zopa Rinpoche, it's obvious this man has got it. It's something, you can't just rave on for hours about benefiting others, You just can't do that unless you have it in your mind. You just can't. So for me, he's one of the most powerful examples I mean, all the holy beings out there, and they all show different aspects, you know. I mean, Dalai Lama, His Holiness, he shows the aspect in the world, doesn't he, of being very ordinary, very simple. He doesn't show it. He's very simple and ordinary and down to earth, because he talks to the entire world, you're not just a Buddhist, you know. But Lama Zopa is like over the top in the way he shows and how he describes love and compassion, how he describes bodhicitta. When he goes into incredible depth about the unbearable suffering of all the realms, you know that he means it. You know it's coming directly from experience, and from all ordinary people like us, it's exhausting. I mean, it's exhausting to think about it, you know. We like the idea maybe of love and compassion for everybody, but it doesn't last long. And to think of this, and this is why you've got to understand that this level of compassion is for all levels of suffering. In fact, they say the bodhisattvas have even more profound compassion for the harmers, the pedophiles, the murderers, the thieves, the bad people, because why? It's so clear, because they are harming themselves unbearably. That's the real basis of compassion. In fact, right at the beginning of the teachings is about karma, right? That everything we do produces the person we become. This is the fundamental basis of this extraordinary level of compassion, because they say the bodhisattvas forget about having compassion for us because we don't realize emptiness. No, the main compassion is because we don't realize, every sentient being doesn't realize that each one of us is producing our own happiness, and each one of us is producing our own suffering. We are totally ignorant of that in our culture. It's a rare thing to find a person who understands cause and effect, you know, this idea, not even in future lives, but even just in this life, how we produce the person we become. How if we're angry and resentful and jealous and depressed, what kind of person do you think you are producing but a miserable, miserable person? In other words, the view we all have, the dualistic view, is my suffering comes from out there. I'm allowed to be angry. Look at what they're doing to me. That view, the schizophrenic view, is beyond heartbreaking for the bodhisattvas. And when we can start to see that, then we can begin to have compassion for others. Because we don't realize that by harming others, we are harming ourselves and producing unbearable future suffering. This really does take time. When we're on track with that, we are on track with Buddha's teachings, you know, and we can begin to have some deeper compassion. This is the point. Okay. I mean, there's a chapter here, number 2, which is how Lama Zopa talks, the benefits of bodhicitta. I don't even know how to begin to talk about that. Let's see what Venerable Kay says. Let's see what she says. Chapter 2, okay. Chapter 2. Okay, so this is the general attitude. It's quite a specific point to understand, okay, of the Bodhisattva path. In all the wisdom wing, the teachings about karma and the teachings about the mind and the delusions and getting renunciation of suffering and its causes, effectively, and as Lama Zopa puts it, effectively, when you look at the Four Noble Truths, because the Four Noble Truths is the presentation of the first and second scopes. It's the presentation of the wisdom wing. In the Four Noble Truths, there's no discussion about compassion. It's Buddha's first teachings about how there is suffering, there are causes, you can get rid of them, which is nirvana, and then the methods. So it's all about the wisdom wing. And so the main enemy, effectively, in the world, in every mind, is attachment. So everything in the wisdom wing is you know, to recognize his attachment and see how it causes you to do harm to others, and see how it harms ourselves, and the wish to give it up. It's the main enemy. Effectively, the main cause of suffering in the Four Noble Truths is attachment. So now the emphasis in the compassion wing is different. They say the enemy is called self-cherishing, which is a very sweet term in Tibetan, but as we would call it in our ordinary English language, is selfishness, putting self first. Now, this is a massive topic in modern psychology, because we can see we have terrible low self-esteem, we loathe ourselves, we harm ourselves. And so obviously we feel we need to have some self-love, as we say, compassion for ourselves, take care of ourselves, look after ourselves. We do. But as soon as we hear that selfishness in this framework is the main cause of our suffering, it sounds rather depressing, and it sounds rather mean of Buddha to point that out. Of course, I have to think of myself. Look how bad everything is. If I don't think of myself, who will? So we've really got to have the framework clear. We've really got to understand the Buddhist approach. And of course, in the Buddha's teachings, it's just taught as an explicit thing. It's taught implicitly, but with reference to the materialist model, we've got to give a bit of background to this, because it sounds so cruel and we can easily misunderstand it. So if you're in a lousy relationship with a crummy boyfriend and you've got masses of low self-esteem, which means you've got masses of attachment, and you're angry and you're jealous and you're depressed, and then you hear the Bodhisattva teachings, which tells you that you're suffering because you only think of yourself, it's too hard to hear it. We can't hear. It seems not fair and unkind of Buddha and rather high. So then you think, then you feel in that relationship, then you think, well, I've got to, forgive my husband. I've got to love him and stop and think of him all the time when he's abusing me every day. We can't work it out. In other words, it's necessarily a higher practice. I can't emphasize this enough until we understand this. The compassion teachings are literally more advanced. So the only way you can begin to work on your self-cherishing, which is the sweet Tibetan term for being selfish, for putting self first, is having done the wisdom wing first. The only person who's qualified to really do these outrageous practices in the compassion wing is a person who's done the wisdom wing. You've got to understand this. It's levels and levels and levels of mental development. And the compassion wing, by definition, is more advanced. So you won't even understand self-cherishing unless you've understood attachment, because it's a variation of attachment, that's all. In other words, as a result of having attachment, we necessarily put me first. When we understand properly the framework of Buddhist psychology, it'll make sense to us and we'll be able to interpret it properly, And as Pabongka Rinpoche says, all these bodhisattva teachings, you need to be a suitable vessel to practice them. That means you've done the wisdom wing. That's why in the West it's really confusing, because lots of people come into Buddhism because they like the idea of compassion and love. But if they haven't done work on their own mind, if they haven't seen their own self-cherishing, if they haven't seen their own attachment, if they haven't seen their own low self-esteem, if they haven't seen their own anger and depression, your compassion is so limited. We won't understand that until we've done the earlier stages of practice, until we've understood the Buddhist model of the mind, which we learn in the wisdom wing, It's extremely important. So the enemy is called here on the compassion wing because the opposite is to exchange yourself for others, putting others first. And that's the main point about bodhicitta, which in our ordinary world, we would consider, if you read the qualities of a bodhisattva, it sounds like you're mentally ill, quite literally, because I think the crucial point, isn't it, in modern psychology, there's no view at all that you can rid the mind completely of attachment, anger, jealousy, low self-esteem, depression, arrogance. There's no view as such as that. It seems mental illness. I remember one woman, and this is really understandable, who first heard these views. She burst out laughing. She said, but you're mentally ill if you don't have those other qualities, because we give them equal status, don't we? Along with love, compassion, and generosity. We think a normal person has a little bit of anger and some attachment and some jealousy and some love and some compassion. There's no view in modern psychology or neuroscience that would even ever indicate, there are no methods for it, to rid the mind utterly of the neuroses. And that's Buddha's unique approach. This is the point, We don't get this, we won't understand the Buddha's view. We just won't. This is why we've studied the other modules first, So self-cherishing, putting me first, is another way of showing the way we suffer. It's a different emphasis. In the first stages, we talk about how attachment is why we suffer. Effectively, it's the same in a way. You say attachment to get what I want. It's putting I first. Because eventually, when you've got bodhicitta, you've made this paradigm shift where there's literally no longer the thought of the usual neurotic I that needs something. There's no longer the thought of wanting anything for yourself. There's no longer the thought of wanting to give something to yourself. There's no longer the thought of who's going to love me. If, you know, there's just, it's hard to even conceive of that. But that's the point. When you've got bodhicitta, it's like outrageous, you know. So self-cherishing, so all these 11 techniques are in reference to transforming the mind from cherishing self to cherishing others. And that's what you've got when you've got bodhicitta. So it's a pretty outrageous level of teachings, you know. And of course, it doesn't mean we can't start practicing this until we've got wisdom. No way, we can start immediately. But we have to know where we are at. We have to know where we are at. In one of the practices we're going to discuss in this 4 classes is that text called the 8 Verses of Mind Transformation, which are the classic texts that's studied among the Tibetans that they adore, that was written by Langri Tangpa, who was a disciple of Drom Tompo, who was a disciple of Atisha. And this practice of exchanging self for others was literally kept secret. Because it's so outrageous. We'll go through the text will be part of our discussion, this modules. So Venerable K is teaching, you know, in other words, she's referring bodhicitta versus self-cherishing. So we can read about this, but we can see how it's high. You can see, and you can be very humble about it, you know how outrageous it is. And of course, all we can do is practice according to our capacity. But you have to know where you are at. You know, in other words, you could argue the only person who can really, truly practice cherishing others more than self is a person who's accomplished giving up attachment, giving up anger, giving up jealousy, and has become this marvelous, self-confident, content, fulfilled person. This is the result of the wisdom wing of renunciation. All the time we hear it in these negative terms, giving up suffering, giving up the causes of suffering. But there's another way you can frame it, and they don't do it in the teachings, but it is effectively the same. It's a method. The method of giving up suffering is a method for getting happy. So it sounds very positive to say it that way, but that's exactly what it is. So as a result of the renunciation path, you become a fulfilled, content, joyful, stable, disciplined, self-confident human being. I mean, that's surely is all we want. And that's the person who's now qualified to go to the deeper levels of the bodhisattva path and to rip out the deeper levels of self-cherishing, to get to the more radical level, happily, because you understand, you know, you've got to be a suitable vessel to practice these levels of the teachings. There's no question. In other words, if you're in a neurotic relationship and you're miserable and you're being abused and upset and beaten up by your partner, your job is not to sit there and, I mean, if you can do it, but it will be very unusual. Your job is to get the hell out of there, have some self-respect and say, thanks a lot, babe, I'm out of here. Not to sit there and take the punches. That's bizarre, you know. That's self-loathing. That's hopelessness. That's just the most awful, idiotic thing to do. Okay, that's just a general introduction. So any questions about that so far?
Ariella?
Yeah.
Good evening, Venerable Robina. I think I have a kindergarten level question.
Sweetheart, it's appropriate. Nothing
In regards to the murderers and the pedophiles, by their actions, that they're also harming themselves. I get that, but I find it, I don't know even how to ask properly the question, but what about all the harm that they did to others? I'm not saying send them to the electric chair, but I'm finding it difficult to put it aside. You
who
have
says
the right
you should, but who says you should put it aside, Ariella? Who's telling you that? Why do you suggest it
Because
means
if you
that?
keep it there in front of you, I will always,
Keep
you
what
will
in
keep
front of you,
seeing
darling?
the harm the person
Keep
did.
what in, no. Okay, this is where the wisdom wing has to come first, Ariella. This is exactly a good point. So listen, sweetheart. When you start at the beginning of the path and you learn first to control your body and speech. Now, why would you want to do that, Ariella? Which is abide by the laws of karma. Based on anything you've heard about the Buddha's teachings, why would you want to do the very first level of practice and not kill and not steal and not lie? Why would you want to be like that? Why would you want to, what would motivate you to do that? That's the first level of practice, junior school. So please, what do you understand from Buddha's teaching? When Buddha says, don't kill, don't steal, don't lie, why would you want to practice giving up killing, giving up stealing, giving up lying?
Not to hurt any sentient beings.
No, that's not, no, that's the point, darling. Now this is the point, sweetheart. And it's hard for us to hear this. The
I
Buddha
don't have
is
the right to do it.
I beg your pardon?
I don't have the right.
Nothing to do
it.
with it. Nothing to do with it, Ariella.
I'm sorry.
This is
Okay.
no, don't be sorry, darling. This is the point to understand. It gives reference to your other question when you understand this point. What the Buddha is saying, and you've probably heard this 1,000 times, but it takes time to go in, sweetheart. The Buddha's fundamental starting point, which is the basis of his first level of instructions to all sentient beings, which is to do not harm others. His reason, he has found from his own observation that everything we do and think and say leaves seeds in my mind that will ripen in the future as my suffering and my happiness. So the first beneficiary of you refraining from harming others, Ariella, is yourself.
Karma.
Well, you just said the Buddhist word for it. I'm trying to explain it to you.
Oh.
But if we don't have that, Ariella, if you can't, okay, let me ask you this question, and all of us the same. Unless you're a bodhisattva, you're probably like the most of us, and you might get upset sometimes, you maybe get angry sometimes, you may be a bit mean to people sometimes. Would you accept that? You accept that? Okay, join the universe. We're all human beings. So check this, Ariella. Check the last time you said something mean or did something mean to somebody. Was it motivated by love and compassion, or was it motivated by anger, attachment, depression, jealousy? Which one? What would have been the basis of your harming another?
Mostly anger.
Thank you, darling. Now, the Buddha's telling you, all of us, that any action you do based on anger, which is an action you'll do with your body or your speech that will harm others, right? Is first, you've got to know that that action will sow a seed in your mind that will create, will ripen as you continuing to be angry, as you having other people be angry at you, and even in the future for suffering rebirths. So the first level of practice, Ariella, is to have this powerful, if you like, call it this, compassion for yourself, that you are sick of suffering. So this is why you want to stop killing, stop lying, stop stealing, and then eventually give up anger, give up attachment, because you are sick of the suffering it causes you. When you have that, then you look at someone else harming another, and you'll go, oh my God, I understand exactly how they feel. Look at the harm they're doing to themselves by harming others. Can you hear me, Ariella?
Loud and clear.
Thank you, sweetheart.
Thank
So in other
you.
words, I think, pedophiles have mummies, and mothers know that their beloved son is harming himself. That's the level we're describing here of compassion. When you can see the pedophile, when you can see the harmer, and you understand your own mind, you understand how you are driven uncontrollably by your anger and your self-centeredness and your jealousy, and that harms you, then you can see others, and this is the real basis of having unbelievable compassion for them. That doesn't mean you pat them on the head and say, oh, the poor thing can't help it. Put them in prison, stop them from harming others. But you don't just have compassion for the victim, you also have compassion for the harmer. This is the level of compassion in the Bodhisattva path. But you can't have that, Ariella, until you've done the deep work inside yourself by seeing the pain that your attachment and your depression and your anger and your jealousy cause you. And that's the first stage of practice. Good, darling. It's the point. We have to hear it and hear it and hear it, you know. All of us are the same, darling. That's a really good point. So thank you so much for bringing it up.
Thank you.
In other words, if it is your beloved child and you see your child beating the dog, you're going to have compassion for the dog, but you're going to really have compassion for your child because you can see he's out of his brain with his anger and he's harming himself. As a mother, you would see that. Your heart would break for your child. That's the compassion we're trying to develop here for every sentient being. Because as my mother used to say to me, I am my own worst enemy. What we do and say and think brings my happiness and my suffering. And that's the first stages of practice, Ariella. Thank you, darling. That's a good point. Thank you so much. What else, people? Yes, Amjad, yes. Talk to me.
Hi, Venerable. Thank you for today. I think I find that compassion for others comes a bit more naturally to me than compassion for myself in a way. I look at the wisdom wing and it feels very hard to achieve, not because it's objectively hard to achieve, not because I don't see other people doing it, but it almost feels very far away from me, if that makes sense. So if you could please,
and then the question.
So if you could please advise on that, cultivating.
So give me an example of whom you might have compassion for. Just think of some person or being and their experience and tell me who you could have compassion for, who it's easy for you to have compassion for.
Insects.
And why do you have compassion for insects?
I find them really fascinating. I find them really beautiful.
Well, that's like attachment. So why do you have compassion for them?
Well, I find them that they're harmed by other beings usually, that, you know, if everyone experiences a lot of aversion towards them.
No, I understand. Okay, so if you saw a spider killing a fly, how would you think about the spider there? What kind of feeling would you have about the spider there?
I'd just say it's living the course of its life and following its instinct.
Okay, so that intense conversation I just had with Ariella, you didn't hear a word of it, with respect to you. What did you hear me say to Ariella? Tell me, get me the essence of what you heard. This really shows Ariella's not the first person to ask it. This just takes time. What was the essence? I'm not trying to question. I mean, I am trying to question you because your question is very clear. So what do you think you heard me say to Ariella about compassion for the harmers? Why would you have compassion for a harmer, in other words?
Because they're harming themselves.
So why would you have compassion for the spider?
Because it's harming itself.
But you didn't say that. You said, oh, it's living its life. So you're taking it for granted that. So what do you think would be in a mind of a being who is compelled to kill and then eat? What is that? What are the names of those delusions? Do you know the Buddhist psychology enough to know the names of those delusions?
Do you mean attachment?
And then aversion, and then extreme tendency to kill. So what do you think the spider is doing to its own mind? What kind of future rebirths and what kind of future suffering is the spider creating for itself? That's the compassion we're talking about here. It's easy to have compassion for little insects who people hate. And it's easy to have compassion for little dogs who get kicked. It's easy to have compassion for children who get jumped on by pedophiles. That's the simple level of compassion. So until you, like I said to Ariella, have looked into your own mind and seen your own attachment and your own anger and your own fears and your own depression and see that that causes you suffering, you cannot have the level of compassion we're describing here. So that's why you're so common. I have compassion for others, not myself. It's because you haven't done the wisdom wing properly. And the compassion you do have for others is sentimental, with respect. Are you with me? Are you understanding my point?
Yeah.
Good job. Very good. So when we really have renunciation of suffering and its causes, the technical term in Buddhism, we would say it's incredible compassion for yourself. You can't bear the thought of another moment of suffering. That's why you would never want to kill or steal or get angry or lie or any of that, because you know it harms you. So that's a pretty intense realization to have. And what it means is you'd have such self-respect. And then you'd have unbelievable compassion for others because you've done that part of the work. That's why the wisdom wing has to come first. You with me?
Yeah, thank you.
That's good points, people. These are exactly the points that we don't, in our culture, we miss completely, you know. So important. And both questions are the same, really. What else, darlings? Yes, Ariella again. What's the question, darling?
So the little poor spider that cannot go to the supermarket and buy food will always stay in samsara.
That's right. That's the
he-
tragedy. And guess what? It was a human being at one point, and due to a tendency to kill, it then got born as a spider. And then once you're down, it's very hard to get up again, honey. And that's even more reason to have compassion for the spider and try to help it not kill. That's exactly the point.
I understand the spider because, again, I'm sorry if I sound stupid. He cannot go to the supermarket.
Yeah, but who's
The
created this?
lion,
I understand, darling. Who created this?
nature, Mother Nature.
No, not Mother Nature, no such thing, sweetheart. It's fine, you can say that view, but that's not the Buddha's view. Buddha would say that we've all had countless lives and we create our own life. We create ourselves, Ariella. The spider, as a result of their past actions, has turned into a spider. The lion, as a result of her past actions, has turned herself into a lion. You, as a result of your actions, have turned yourself into a human, which is the opportunity you've got to then fix your mind before you turn into a lion again, you know? So this is the view of karma that you learned back in the wisdom wing. I'm not asking you to accept it, Ariella, but this is the Buddhist teachings, and this is the framework of the teachings we're giving here. When you understand karma, that you've had countless past lives, you've been spider countless times, you've been lion countless times, and now like a miracle, your virtue has ripened and you got a human mummy at conception, which you created the course to have. So this is this precious opportunity we have to transform our minds right now. And that's like the miracle of being a human. And then you'll have even more compassion for the spider and the lion and all the other beings who are just simply following their negative tendencies. And that's the reason to have compassion for them. Not Mother Nature. I mean, I don't know what you mean. We all say Mother Nature, but it's a big fat philosophical view the Buddha does not have. Then the law that runs the universe for the Buddha is the law of karma, you know. You with me, darling? I mean, this is the Buddha's teachings. So all you can do is try, if you want to understand it, you know, try and get the framework clear. So you understand why a spider is a spider and why a lion is a lion and why are you a human. This is the bigger picture in the Buddhist view, which you get in the wisdom wing. Do you understand, darling? And then again, you have compassion for the spider and the lion. That's why the way to help a lion or to help a spider is at least prevent them from harming. That's why if you have a domestic dog, lucky dog, it doesn't have to go and rip the guts out of cats for breakfast, you know. What a lucky little animal. You stop it from killing. How kind, you know, because these animals are driven. I mean, the spider and the lion are driven by their tendency to kill. You know, they've got no other choice. That's the tragedy. That's the tragedy.
So a domestic dog has a better chance in the next life to come back as a human than a spider eating insect.
Well, at least one of the good thing we can give an animal is to protect it from not killing by feeding it food, but there's more to it than that. You have to also do other things for the cat and the dog to be able to get a human birth. You've got to have imprints in the mind. You'd let it hear mantras and you know, yes, many things. It would have a much better chance because it's around humans and it can learn, the fact that it doesn't have to follow its instinct to kill and live in fear is a tremendous gift we can give to our animals, you know. Do you understand, darling? Yeah, good, Ariana, thank you. Who else, people? Yes, Linda. Hello, darling.
Thank you, and hello, Venerable Ravina. I have sort of a practical question, which is that as far as the lower and middle scope, and that it sounds really important to do, at least make progress on that, or if not completely first. I'm wondering if it's as sort of straightforward as just starting to just really focus on not doing harm to others, or if there are resources or structures to support that level, the lower and middle scope practices.
What do you mean things to support? What do you mean by that, sweetheart?
For example, this course is very supportive to me as a structure. I read things, I do specific meditations, and I don't know I'm not that clear about what is lower scope, for example.
Oh, I see. Okay. So, okay. All right. So the fundamental view the Buddha has, the starting point in a sense, is this view of karma, which is the view that there are trillions upon trillions upon trillions of sentient beings, mind possessors, and that everything we think and do and say, every one of us, is the process that produces who we become. So the simplest way to say karma, it's self-creation. There's no view in Buddhism that there's a creator out there who runs the show. It's not just random events. Everything is the law of karma that runs the show. All minds exist within this natural law, and it virtually runs the universe, this law. No one runs this law. There's no creator. He didn't make it up. He's observed it. So this is the most fundamental starting point in all of Buddha's teachings, that there are trillions of sentient beings, and each one of us is experiencing the fruits of our past programming. And each one of us now will produce, by the way we act and think and say, will produce the future person we become. So the starting point, the essence of the lower scope, junior school, grade 1, the essence of it then is to stop harming others. And the reason Buddha exhorts us to not kill, not steal, not lie, to live a disciplined life, to control the servants of your mind, why not to kill and not to steal? They are actions that harm others. That is what defines them as negative actions. But the basis of Buddha's exhorting us not to do them is because, honey child, precious Linda, he is saying to you, you killing and you stealing and you lying produces a nightmare for your future. And honey child, you don't want a nightmare for the future. So this is the starting point. The essence of all the lower scope teachings are to help us protect our body and our speech, not even our mind yet, to stop harming others. Then you program your mind with at least not killing and not stealing and not lying. And that is just tremendous. Then you get to the middle scope. Now that you've subdued your body and speech to some degree, now you can get to the root of the problem, which is your crazy mind, your anger, your attachment, your jealousy, your low self-esteem, and you become your own therapist, and you learn to deeply know your own mind, to deeply distinguish between the positive and the negative states. And this is eventually, if you perfected these first two, you'd eventually achieve liberation from suffering. It's tremendous. And this is a renunciation. So you have a deep sense, in other words, a deep feeling of compassion for yourself. You realize you produce yourself, and you do not want to produce future suffering. You don't want to kill or lie or steal and be reborn in the lower realms, because you know you don't want to suffer. So it's a huge, we would call it huge compassion for yourself, the first and second scopes. Do you understand? Now we realize, oh my God, we're all in the same boat. Look at this. And now you can begin to have compassion for others and have this tremendous courage to want to never give up helping others, because you now know why they are suffering, because you've discovered why you are suffering. Do you understand?
Yes, thank you. That's very helpful.
Good, darling. So when we hear this levels of practice, then we practice according to our capacity. So if you've got a tendency to, to badmouth Dave, then your first practice is, shut your mouth. Don't worry about controlling your mind yet. Just don't say the words. This is a profound level of practice. So at least control the body and speech. If you've got a tendency to swat the fly, attempt not to swat the fly. Control your body, control your speech. Every time you do that, you are programming your mind into tendencies to not harm, which is an amazing quality. And you are the beneficiary of this. Of course, Dave will be the beneficiary too. In other words, the main beneficiary of the first stages of practice is oneself. But as Lama Zopa says, of course, the rats and the cockroaches will be beneficiaries as well. They'll be happy because you leave them in peace and they're going to have a party. But the emphasis of that level of practice is to protect yourself from future suffering. Do you understand? So we do it according to our capacity. That's it. Then eventually, if you control your body and speech, you can then control your mind. When eventually you control your mind, you'll even then be able to have compassion. When Dave's mean to you, you'll understand where he's coming from and you'll forgive him, But it's got to be one step at a time. It's very natural psychologically a progress. You understand, Linda? And it's all framed in the teachings, but because the teaching is sort of like ancient 14th century Tibetan coming from ancient, 2 centuries old India, we've got to kind of reframe them sometimes in our modern language to really get the meaning of it. Otherwise it sounds a bit abstract for us. Do you understand, Linda? Good, darling. Yes, Sabine, talk to me.
Hello. The last 30 years, I worked as a social worker with a lot of victims of abuse or pedophiles, and also young offenders.
Yes.
And the last year, I stopped everything because I got completely confused. And I think because, like when I see a pedophile, I go to court with the victim. I'm angry, and
yes, I understand.
I try to suppress it because I don't like feeling angry. It doesn't make me feel like a good person.
I understand.
But I never had another system, and then we start looking, how can we look at these people, and then we start to think, yeah, but who did something to them that they become? That's how we look at it.
That's in the West, right, in the Western view, exactly right.
Yes, but it doesn't help me because some people think that you just have bad and good people and victims, but I got confused because I know it's not right. So maybe this is a much better explanation.
Well, it's a more it's a more broad explanation, because you see, obviously the materialist model of the mind it posits that a pedophile had a mother and a father, and the first place we look for why a pedophile has those tendencies, we look at the mummy and daddy's tendencies, and then when we find that they're nice white Christian parents who don't harm anybody, then we're completely confused. We don't know where to look. So it is, in that sense, it is a limited view. You might have to like the Buddhist view, but the Buddhist view would say the main reason the pedophile comes into this life, and then since a little boy doesn't know why he wants to jump on, have sexual feelings for little children, and never grows up, and at the age of 50 still thinks little children are sex objects. There's a tendency in his mind, there's a tendency in his own mind that he brought with him. And a person wants to lie or steal or kill, it's a tendency he brought with him into his own life from his own life actions. And that explains the lion, that explains the spider, that explains all of us. And if you come into this life with a natural feeling of compassion, it's because you've practiced compassion. If you come into this life with a tendency to be good at music, is because you've practiced music. This is the fundamental starting point of karma, that we come into this life fully programmed with whatever the tendencies are that we express in this life. At least it explains it. And then you see, that's the thing in our culture, all we can do is think of what happened to that pedophile. But sometimes you're going to find that a pedophile had really nice mummy and daddy and nothing happened to him. And then it doesn't. Exactly. Whereas the view of karma is a powerful view, that we bring our own goodness and our own badness with us, but we've all got the potential to be free of the rubbish. We have to become conscious and to practice, and it gives us confidence. So I mean, I work with people in prison for 25 years, and I deal with the harmers, I deal with the pedophiles, I deal with the murderers. And so this is what people in prison, for example, my friends in prison who love the Buddhist teachings, because it gives them some hope to know that they're not set in stone, that there's nothing you can't change. And this is something for me, we dealing with people in prison. If a person comes to me and wants to look at their mind, I don't care how much harm they've done. The fact that they want to look at their own mind is a marvelous quality, and they're prepared to want to deal and to take responsibility for themselves. And that's why some people in prison have got no choice. They're stuck there, I mean, the bad people aren't often in prison, right? I mean, so it's like, as long as we have an opportunity to look into our mind and take responsibility and regret the harm we've done, and that's the powerful process of purification. There's nothing we can't change. There's nothing we can't purify. But we have to have the will to look, and the wish and the humility to know that I can change and to take responsibility. So
but it's also a matter of having hope, but also having a method.
That's exactly right. Precisely, exactly, darling. That's exactly the point. So this compassion, I mean, the thing is, we've all been harmed by somebody in this life, and some of us been harmed terribly. So we can't leap into compassion for them first. So the Buddhist approach is, you'd first have the view of karma, which is a big one, and then you'd understand why the person did it, and then you'd understand why you had the karmic connection with that person. And you go through this internal process of dealing with your own pain first, and then slowly you're able to see in the world that we're all in the same boat. And as gradually compassion can come, but it has to come internally first for ourselves, understanding karma, letting go of it, taking responsibility and moving forward. And then we can begin even to have compassion for others. But it's got to be one step at a time, you know. You can't rush it.
I noticed that a lot of my colleagues and the field I worked in and myself, we all have a background like a heavy backpack.
Yes.
And we get some kind of motivation to do like this kind of work.
Yes.
But a lot of us, we hit the wall. We get like burnouts, and then we go for inspiration. We don't find it.
No,
and then I found the people from Homeboys Industries in the United States. And then they said, yeah, but if you burn out, it means you're feeding your ego by doing social work. And it was like in my face. Woo! And I showed it in my team, but everybody got really angry with me. And I think maybe it's because of what you said, they were not ready to hear this.
No, I understand. And the thing, I think the key point in Buddhism that I find very revealing about the mind, which is unique to the Buddhist view of the mind, is that we have to learn to distinguish within ourselves between the unhappy states of mind and the positive mind. So being a social worker, that's called compassion, sweetheart. Never, never criticize your compassion. But the Buddhist view is, because we have this attachment to be seen as a good person, we have also attachment, and that's what causes us suffering. Compassion never cause you suffering. So don't throw the baby out with the bathwater and stop helping others. Just give up attachment and anger and blame, and that'll make you more powerful and even more compassionate. And then you will not burn out.
Yes. But I don't want to go back before I have some more wisdom, I think.
There you go. Very intelligent. Good on you, girl.
Thank you.
Well done, Sabine. You keep moving. Hello, CB. I don't know who else you are, but CB. Talk to me.
It's Cyril.
Oh, Cyril, hello.
Yes, thank you, Venerable Robina. So my question is that in the wisdom wing, in order to give up attachment, you need compassion for yourself.
The Buddhists don't say it that way, but that way works for us.
Okay,
yes,
so you need.
In other words, put it this way, Cyril, when you can see that like I said to Ariella, if anything you've done in your life to harm others, even the smallest action, if you can see that has come from your attachment, your resentment, your jealousy, your self-centeredness, your hurt, your depression, your anger, not out of guilt, but by definition, you don't do it out of love and compassion. So then when you realize that out of your own pain, your own delusions is why you harm others, then you'll understand having compassion for others because it's coming from their same pain, which is maybe 1,000 times worse than yours. So of course, logical.
That was my question.
It's like compassion for yourself. Renunciation of suffering and its causes. Another way to say it that we understand in the West is you've got incredible compassion for yourself. You can't stand the thought of more suffering. So you're determined to give it up. Yes,
exactly. So my other question, I think you touched on it, but maybe you can just elaborate a little bit. So how does this compassion, how does it work that this compassion for yourself switches to compassions for others in the compassion wing?
Okay. When we understand what Buddha means by suffering, the first kind of suffering, for example, the first kind of suffering is when the bad things happen. So if you understand the view of karma, which is the fundamental starting point of the wisdom wing, when you understand when you get harmed by another person, that's because you have harmed them. That's because you have created the cause from harming in the past that you meet this person now and they harm you. You also know, incidentally, that every time a person is kind to you, you also know that's because you have been kind in the past. So you take responsibility for that as well. So when you see another person who harms another, like a dog and a man kicking a dog, you know they've got a strong karmic history together from past lives. And by definition, the dog must have harmed that human in the past. And now the human is compelled to harm the dog in return. When you know that for yourself, self, and you see the world harming each other, the abusers, the stealers, the liars, the victims. We're all in this big boat together, having harmed each other, having helped each other, and we just keep moving around in circles until we break that cycle. That's the starting point of karma. You realize we're all compelled, we're driven by our own neuroses to keep harming, or we're driven by our own having harmed to be harmed now. The basis of this is karma. Without karma, there is no basis of compassion for others who are the harmers. There's no basis whatsoever. So it's a massive view to have. Not just, oh yeah, I like karma, but to really analyze the meaning of it and how we all get born with our tendencies. So there's 4 ways that karma ripens. One is the type of rebirth, like my point to Ariella, due to incredible past virtue at the time of her past death, not more than a few weeks before she found her way to her present mother's human womb. One of her very powerful virtuous tendencies of not killing was triggered when she stopped breathing in the past life, and that programmed her mind to go to a mother's human womb and get a human life. What how amazing from her own past virtue. So then the second way, Ariella example, karma ripens is in her tendencies. She's got, if she's like the rest of us, she's got some negative tendencies, and we all know these. We can't stop ourselves because they're habits. And we've got good tendencies. What a miracle. As a human, we can at least use our discipline, our intelligence to make choices and gradually change ourselves. But the third way that karma ripens is called experiences similar to the cause, which is how you're seen and treated by others. So on the wisdom wing, you see that some people like you and they're kind to you. You don't just take it for granted. You realize, wow, that's the fruit of my past virtue. And then when someone harms you, you don't get all resentful and childish and how dare you harm me, I don't deserve it. You know you must have created the cause by harming others. So this view of karma is fundamentally necessary to get our head around, first intellectually and then gradually experientially. That is the basis of having compassion for ourselves. Without that, it just doesn't make any sense. Without karma, it makes no sense. This view. And then you have the basis of realizing the pedophile coming into this life from addiction to sex in their mind, and they get born wanting to jump on little girls, driven by it. One of my friends in Kentucky on death row, as my Buddhist friend Mitchell tells me, and I know this guy, he said, Rabina, he thinks of torture all the time. This is the way karma is. We think of eating cakes all the time. I mean, look at our pathetic habits to eat too much cake. You know, one of the signs of attachment is you think of something all the time when it's not there. It's called compulsive obsessive. Well, can you imagine being born with a human mind and all you want to do is torture since you're a little boy, and you can't stop the thoughts because you've got this habit in your mind. I mean, if you can't have compassion for that person, yes, I'm glad he's on death row out of the way, so he's not harming other people. But when we understand the mind and how we've got tendencies, so this is the wisdom wing. First you understand karma, then you understand your own mind, then you have a basis for compassion for everybody.
But that's that link. I still don't get that link. Or how do you go from the compassion for yourself to the compassion for others?
Well, I answered it. You didn't hear it. I said it in detail, but you just didn't hear it. Okay, let me say another example. Let's say you are addicted to eating food. Okay. Alcohol. Let's say you're an alcoholic. You agree alcoholism is a tendency of attachment to keep wanting to drink alcohol. It's a tendency. Yes. Okay, so until you realize that's causing you suffering, you will never give it up, will you?
Correct.
Once you've identified it, once you have seen the pain you caused yourself, do you not think, for God Almighty's sake, Cyril, that you would then be able to have compassion for another alcoholic because you see what drives them? It's the same as you. Can you see that?
Not necessarily. I could just be happy with quitting myself to drink.
That means you haven't understood yourself. That means you haven't even begun to understand your own mind. That means you haven't even begun to understand the suffering that you're causing yourself by being an alcoholic. It means you haven't even begun the work, Cyril. So until you have compassion for yourself and see that you're driven by your own tendencies, which are what cause you suffering, you cannot have compassion for others. So you've got to keep doing the work on yourself, baby. Do you understand the principle or not?
I do.
You do. Good. So keep looking in your mind, baby, and keep seeing your own suffering and keep seeing your own potential. It's okay.
I was thinking maybe the answer is once you've developed compassion for yourself, that's when you start doing the exchanging self for others, and it is that practice that leads you to.
You're missing about 14 steps, Cheryl. You're missing about 14 steps. But generally speaking, you're right.
Thank you.
Slowly, baby. Keep moving. This is a really good discussion, I tell you, because this is the missing piece in our culture. You've got to do intense inner work, is all I'm trying to say. The renunciation wing is intense inner work. It's intense, deep drilling down, seeing your own shit, your own attachment, your own anger, your own depression, and breaking your heart about it. Not guilt, not self-hate. We all have that, and that's just garbage. It's a kind of a softness that comes. And as Lama Zopa says, we have got renunciation of suffering and its causes, which is like compassion for yourself, when just the thought of another moment of attachment is so repulsive. It's like being in a septic tank. But attachment is unbelievably hard to see as a suffering. It's unbelievably hard because it's our default mode. So the level that Buddha's describing is incredibly subtle, incredibly advanced. Are we communicating, people? In other words, the more you know your own mind, the more you know yourself in a way, in a level of subtlety that, I'm sorry, with respect to modern psychology, we don't even have the likes of it, you know. Then you're really on the path. It's pretty intense. As Lama Yeshe said, I can tell you about attachment for one whole year. You will never begin to understand it, and therefore understand attachment, anger, jealousy, low self-esteem, and the rest, until you start going deep inside and doing this inner work. It's intense inner work. It's intense inner therapy, the likes of which we have an idea in the West. We understand. Anybody who's been to a therapist knows the hard work of digging deep into your own shit, you know. It's a huge growing up process of becoming conscious of our human mind and conscious of how we cause ourselves our own suffering. Otherwise, we just live at the gross level and it becomes self-centered, it becomes complacent, and then we have anger. We love to have anger. We love to blame. We love to point fingers. This is just grotesque, you know. It means we haven't begun to understand our own human mind. I hope we're communicating with people, because this is it's a powerful discussion today. And it's time to go home. So think about these things. Please think about it. Okay. Jangchub, Semchub, Rinpoche, Ma Khe Panam, Ke Gyuchi, Ke Pa Nyampa, Me Pa Yang, Gongne, Gondu, Paba Shog. Never give up, sweetheart. Never give up, never give up, never give up. Keep moving, keep moving, keep moving. All right. Thank you, Tara. Thank you, Lars. Thank you, everybody. Much love, people.
Thank
See you
you,
next.
Venerable.
Hi,
Really
Venerable
good
Beta. Thank
day.
you.
Really good day. I'm so happy.
Venerable.
Thank you, everybody.
Yeah.
Thank you.